Sophie Bennett rushed through the busy streets of downtown, clutching her purse in one hand and checking her watch with the other. She couldn't be late today, not with the big client meeting at Apex Corporation where she worked as an executive assistant. Her sensible heels clicked against the sidewalk as she hurried into her favorite coffee shop. "The usual, Sophie?" asked Ted, the friendly barista who knew her morning routine by heart. "Yes, please. And can you add the special coffee order for the meeting? 6 lattes and 1 black coffee, extra hot." Sophie smiled, thinking about how that black coffee was for Nathan Cross, the company's CEO and her secret boyfriend of the past. Yeah, just thinking about Nathan made her heart skip a beat. Nobody at work knew about their relationship, and they wanted to keep it that way. It hadn't been easy, meeting in secret and pretending to be nothing more than boss and employee during office hours, but they both agreed it was for the best. As Sophie waited for the coffee order, her mind wandered to how it all began. She had been working at Apex for 3 years when Nathan took over as CEO. Unlike the previous boss, Nathan actually noticed the hard work of his employees. He would stop by people's desks, learn their names, and ask about their lives. It wasn't long before Sophie found herself looking forward to their brief conversations. Then came the night of the company Christmas party. Sophie had stayed late to help clean up, and Nathan offered to drive her home since it was snowing. They ended up talking for hours in his car, parked outside her apartment building. That was their first real conversation, and it changed everything. "Order's ready!" Ted's voice snapped Sophie back to the present. She carefully balanced the drink carrier and headed to the office. The elevator doors opened to the 47th floor of Apex Corporation, and Sophie stepped into the familiar buzz of morning activity. She distributed the coffees to her co-workers, saving Nathan's for last. As always, she kept her expression professional when she entered his office. "Your coffee, Mr. Cross," she said, placing it on his desk. Their fingers brushed slightly as she set down the cup, a small touch that sent electricity through her body. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett," Nathan replied, his blue eyes twinkling with their shared secret. He was wearing the tie she had given him for his birthday, though of course nobody knew it was from her. At 38, Nathan cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his dark hair showing just a touch of distinguished gray at the temples. Sophie headed back to her desk, fighting the urge to smile too broadly. Their secret romance had its challenges, but it also had its thrills. The stolen glances during meetings, the accidental brushing of hands when passing documents, the coded text messages about reviewing quarterly reports that actually meant dinner dates at hidden restaurants in the city. The morning progressed, normally until Victoria from marketing stopped by Sophie's desk. "Have you heard about the client coming in today?" she whispered excitedly. "It's Victor Hale." Sophie's stomach tightened. Everyone knew about Victor Hale, the notorious businessman known for his terrible temper and impossible demands. His company was worth millions, and landing his business could mean huge things for Apex. But Victor had already driven 3 other companies to drop his account because of his behavior. Mr. Cross mentioned it in yesterday's meeting," Sophie replied carefully. She had actually heard about it the night before, curled up on Nathan's couch while he worried about making the right impression. The office was buzzing with nervous energy as the meeting time approached. Sophie gathered her materials and headed to the conference room early to make sure everything was perfect. She straightened the chairs, adjusted the blinds, and made sure there were enough notepads and pens at each seat. Nathan arrived first, as always. When they were alone in the conference room, he quickly squeezed her hand. "You okay?" he asked, softly. "I know these high-pressure meetings make you nervous." "I'm fine," Sophie assured him, though her heart warmed at his concern. "Just focus on landing this client. We can celebrate later." She gave him a meaningful look that made him grin. The moment was broken by the arrival of other executives. Sophie stepped back into her professional role, taking her place near the door where she could assist if needed. She watched as Nathan transformed into the confident CEO, greeting board members and preparing for the presentation. Then Victor Hale arrived, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was a tall man with cold eyes and an expression that suggested he had already decided to be disappointed. He barely acknowledged Nathan's greeting and completely ignored Sophie's offer of coffee or water. As Sophie moved to take her seat, disaster struck. Another executive shifted his chair suddenly, bumping into her. The coffee cups on her tray tipped, and before she could stop it, hot coffee splashed across Victor Hale's expensive suit. The room fell silent, Sophie felt the blood drain from her face as Victor looked down at his ruined jacket, then slowly raised his eyes to glare at her. In that moment, she knew her career, and possibly Nathan's big deal, was about to go up in flames. "You stupid, incompetent girl," Victor's voice boomed through the conference room. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? More than you make in a month, I'd guess. This is exactly why I hate dealing with companies that hire based on looks rather than competence." Sophie stood frozen, coffee tray still in her trembling hands, as Victor continued his tirade. She could see the other executives shrinking back, unwilling to intervene. Even the board members looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Then Nathan stood up. "That's enough, Mr. Hale," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The room grew even more silent, if that was possible. Nobody interrupted Victor Hale when he was angry. "Excuse me?" Victor turned his glare on Nathan. "Your employee just ruined a $5,000 suit, and we'll be happy to replace it," Nathan replied calmly. "But I won't stand for you speaking to my girlfriend that way." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. Sophie's eyes widened as she realized what Nathan had just done. Around the room, jaws dropped and heads whipped back and forth between her and Nathan. "Your girlfriend," Victor sputtered, momentarily shocked out of his anger. "Yes," Nathan said, moving to stand beside Sophie. "And while we're being honest, I should mention that she's also one of the most capable employees at this company. The fact that she's my girlfriend has nothing to do with her position here, which she earned long before we began dating." Sophie could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her. A year of careful secrecy had just been blown apart in seconds. Part of her wanted to sink through the floor, but another part, the part that loved Nathan, felt a surge of pride at his defense. The silence stretched on until Victor finally spoke again, his voice dripping with disdain. "Well, this is unexpected. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting for another time, when things are more professional." He turned and stormed out of the conference room. As the door slammed behind him, the room erupted in whispers. Sophie could already see people pulling out their phones, no doubt spreading the gossip throughout the building. She looked at Nathan, who was still standing protectively beside her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I couldn't let him talk to you that way." Sophie wanted to respond, but she could see the board members huddling together, throwing concerned glances their way. Their secret was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The rest of the day felt like a blur to Sophie. As soon as the conference room cleared out, Nathan was pulled into an emergency board meeting. Sophie returned to her desk, but it seemed like every eye in the office was on her. The whispers followed her everywhere she went. "Did you hear? She's been dating the boss. No wonder she got all the best assignment. I always thought there was something going on." Linda from accounting, who used to chat with Sophie during coffee breaks, suddenly had urgent work to do when Sophie entered the break room. Even Victoria from marketing, usually the friendliest person in the office, only gave her a tight smile before hurrying away. Sophie tried to focus on her work, but her computer screen kept blurring as tears threatened to fall. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not where everyone could see. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. "In meetings all day. Don't leave without me. We'll talk tonight. Love you." At least she had him. But even that thought brought fresh worries. What would the board do? Would they force Nathan to choose between her and his position as CEO? She couldn't let him sacrifice everything he'd worked for. Not for her. Around lunchtime, Margaret Wells, the head of human resources, called Sophie into her office. Margaret was a stern woman in her 60s who had been with the company for over 30 years. "Sit down, Ms. Bennett," Margaret said, adjusting her reading glasses. "I think we need to discuss your situation." Sophie sat stiffly in the uncomfortable chair, her hands clasped in her lap to keep them from shaking. "How long has this relationship with Mr. Cross been going on?" Margaret asked, her pen poised over a notepad. "About a year," Sophie answered honestly. There was no point in hiding anything now. Margaret's eyebrows shot up. "A year? And during this time you've continued to work as his direct assistant?" "Yes, but I've never let it affect my work. Everything I've done here has been based on my own merit." "That may be true, but perception matters in business, Ms. Bennett. Already 3 employees have come to me, suggesting that your recent promotion to executive assistant was influenced by your relationship with Mr. Cross." Sophie felt her face grow hot. "I got that promotion 2 months before Nathan and I started dating. You can check the dates." "Nathan, is it?" Margaret wrote something on her pad. "Ms. Bennett, You must understand how this looks. We have strict policies about workplace relationships, especially between executives and their subordinates. I know, Sophie said quietly. That's why we kept it secret. And you thought that was better, deceiving the company? Margaret shook her head. The board is meeting right now to discuss this situation. Until they reach a decision, you'll be temporarily reassigned to assist Mr. Peterson in marketing. Sophie's heart sank. James Peterson was known for giving his assistants the worst jobs in the office. For how long? That depends on the board's decision. And on you and Mr. Cross, of course. Margaret's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I've always found your work to be exemplary. But rules are rules. Back at her desk, Sophie began packing up her things to move to the marketing department. Each item she put in the box felt like another piece of her life being dismantled. The small plant Nathan had given her just because. The photo of her family she'd caught him looking at the day he first asked about her life outside work. The spare tie he kept in her drawer for emergencies. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her mother. Just saw the news on the business websites. Why didn't you tell me you were dating your boss? Call me. Sophie's hand shook as she checked the news on her computer. Sure enough, there it was. Apex Corp CEO's secret office romance revealed during $1 million meeting. Some sites even had grainy photos of her and Nathan entering the same restaurant on various dates. How long had people been watching them? The afternoon dragged on endlessly. In marketing, James Peterson wasted no time putting Sophie to work organizing years of old files. She could hear him on the phone, laughing with someone about how the CEO's girlfriend was now sorting his paperwork. At 5 o'clock, most people began leaving the office. Sophie stayed at her new desk, methodically working through the files. She didn't want to face the elevator's small talk or the stares in the lobby. Around 7, Nathan finally found her. He looked exhausted. His tie loosened and his hair messed up from running his hands through it, something he did when he was stressed. "Sophie," he said softly, and just hearing him say her name made the tears she'd been holding back all day start to fall. Nathan quickly closed the office door and pulled her into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I never meant for it to come out like this." "What did the board say?" Sophie asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "They're not happy. Victor Hale called to officially withdraw from any potential dealings with Apex. The board thinks I've damaged the company's reputation." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "They want me to end things with you." Sophie's heart stopped. And I told them they could accept our relationship or start looking for a new CEO. Nathan's jaw was set in that stubborn way she knew so well. "I'm not giving you up, Sophie. Not for them, not for Victor Hale, not for anyone. But Nathan, this company is your life. Your father built it from nothing. You're my life too," he interrupted. "And my father also taught me that a man who abandons someone he loves for money isn't much of a man at all." Fresh tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks, but these were different from the ones she'd been fighting all day. "What are we going to do?" "First, we're getting out of here. You're coming home with me, and we're going to order takeout and talk about everything." He wiped her tears with his thumb. "And tomorrow we're going to walk into this office together holding hands and show everyone that we're not ashamed of our love." "People will talk," Sophie warned. "Let them talk. We know the truth about us, and that's what matters." He helped her pack up the rest of her things. "Besides, I have a plan. The board gave me until the end of the week to resolve the situation. They're going to be surprised by how I do it." As they left the office together, no longer hiding, Sophie felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The secret was out, for better or worse. Now they would face whatever came next the way they should have from the start, together. But neither of them noticed Victor Hale watching from his car across the street, his cold eyes following them. As they walked to Nathan's car, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "I think I've found a way to take down Nathan Cross. How would you like to help me destroy your little brother's company?" The next morning, Nathan's older brother Alexander Cross sat in his luxurious office across town, smiling as Victor Hale explained his plan. Alexander had always resented how their father had chosen Nathan to run Apex Corporation instead of him, the firstborn son. "It's simple," Victor said, swirling the scotch in his glass. "Your brother's reputation is already damaged. All we need to do is push a little harder, and everything will fall apart." "And what do you get out of this?" Alexander asked, leaning back in his leather chair. "The satisfaction of teaching Nathan Cross that nobody humiliates me in public." Victor's eyes gleamed with malice. "Plus, once he's gone, Apex will need a new CEO, someone more cooperative with my business interests. Alexander smiled. Finally, his chance to take what should have been his all along. Meanwhile, at Apex Corporation, Sophie walked into the office beside Nathan just as he had promised. The whispering started immediately, but Nathan kept his hand firmly in hers until they reached her desk. "Remember," he said quietly, "head held high. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Sophie nodded, though her stomach was in knots. As Nathan headed to his office, she noticed an email from Margaret in HR requesting another meeting. Before she could open it, Victoria from marketing hurried over to her desk. "Sophie!" Victoria looked around nervously before continuing in a whisper. "I'm so sorry about yesterday. I didn't know what to say, and with everyone talking, it's okay," Sophie said, though it wasn't really. A true friend wouldn't have abandoned her. "Listen," Victoria continued. "People are saying all sorts of things, but I wanted you to know there's a rumor going around that someone's trying to dig up dirt on you and Nathan. I thought you should know." Sophie's heart sank. "What kind of dirt?" "I don't know exactly, but I overheard James Peterson talking to someone on the phone about your college records and employment history." Before Sophie could respond, her phone rang. It was her mother again. "Sophie Marie Bennett, why haven't you called me back?" her mother demanded. "I had to find out about your boyfriend from the news, and now reporters are calling the house asking questions about you." "Mom, I'm so sorry," Sophie said, rubbing her temples. "Things have been crazy here." "What kind of questions are they asking?" "Oh, all sorts of nonsense about your past jobs, your relationship history. One even asked about that time you dropped out of college for a semester." Sophie froze. She had never told Nathan about that difficult time in her life, when anxiety and depression had forced her to take a break from school. She'd gone back and finished her degree, but it was still a painful memory. In his office, Nathan was facing his own challenges. The board had called an emergency shareholders meeting for Friday, and he knew they were hoping to force him out. But he had spent all night working on a plan. "Come in," he called when someone knocked on his door. It was Thomas Chen, one of the younger board members, and someone Nathan had always trusted. "Nathan, we need to talk," Thomas said, closing the door. "Alexander was at the club last night, meeting with Victor Hale." Nathan's jaw tightened. Of course his brother would try to take advantage of this situation. What were they discussing? "I couldn't get close enough to hear, but they seemed very friendly for two people who are supposed to be business rivals." Thomas hesitated. "There's something else. Someone's been requesting access to old company records, specifically about hiring practices and promotions from the past few years. They're looking for evidence that I gave Sophie special treatment," Nathan realized, "but they won't find any. Every promotion, every raise she got was based on merit and properly documented." "It's not just that," Thomas said. "They're also looking into your father's will and the terms of your appointment as CEO. Nathan's father had died 2 years ago, leaving Nathan in charge of the company instead of Alexander. The decision had nearly destroyed what was left of the brothers' relationship." "Let them look," Nathan said firmly. "Dad knew what he was doing when he chose me. I hope you know what you're doing too," Thomas replied. "The board is scared, Nathan. Victor Hale isn't just dropping his business with us. He's telling other clients to reconsider their relationships with Apex. Our stock price dropped 5 points this morning." "Trust me," Nathan said. "By Friday, everything will be clear." Later that afternoon, Sophie sat in Margaret's office again, her hands shaking as she looked at the papers in front of her. "These allegations are serious," Margaret said. "Anonymous tips suggesting that you and Mr. Cross began your relationship when you were still an intern, implying that your rapid promotion track was due to personal rather than professional reasons." "That's not true," Sophie exclaimed. "I wasn't. Even working here when Nathan became CEO, anyone can check the dates." "We are checking everything," Margaret assured her. "But in the meantime, the board feels it would be best if you took a paid leave of absence until this matter is resolved." Sophie felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "They want me to leave, temporarily," Margaret emphasized, "just until we can sort this out." "And if I refuse?" Margaret sighed. "Sophie, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to. Take the leave. Use the time to think about whether this relationship is worth the damage it's causing to both your careers." With tears in her eyes, Sophie packed up her desk for the second time in 2 days. As she was putting the last photo in her box, she overheard 2 employees talking around the corner. "Did you see the business news? Apex's stock is falling fast. My brother works at Victor Hale's company, and he says Hale is telling everyone that Nathan Cross is unstable, letting personal drama destroy the company. I heard his brother Alexander is positioning himself to take over. Maybe that would be better for everyone. Sophie clutched her box tighter and hurried to Nathan's office. He needed to know what was happening. But when she got there, his assistant, her replacement, stopped her. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett, but Mr. Cross is in meetings all afternoon. And given the current situation, I've been instructed not to let you into his office without an appointment." Sophie stood there, humiliated, holding her box of belongings. Through the glass walls of Nathan's office, she could see him on the phone, running his hands through his hair in that stressed way again. She wanted to go to him to tell him about the rumors and the forced leave, but maybe this was better. Maybe some distance would help them figure out what to do. As she waited for the elevator, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her blood ran cold as she read it. "Dear Ms. Bennett, I have some interesting information about your time at your previous job and about that semester you took off from college. Would hate for that to become public knowledge. Maybe we should talk about your future at Apex. A friend." The elevator doors opened and Sophie stepped in, her vision blurring with tears. As the doors closed, she didn't see Victor Hale watching her from the lobby, smiling as he typed another message on his phone. Phase 1 complete. The girl is isolated. Now let's see how Nathan handles the pressure. When his precious girlfriend's secrets start coming out, Sophie sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone. The threatening text message seemed to glare back at her. How did they find out about her past? She had worked so hard to move forward from that difficult time. The TV news droned in the background, but a familiar name caught her attention. She turned up the volume. Apex Corporation continues to face scrutiny as its stock price falls for the third straight day, the business reporter announced. Sources close to the company suggest that CEO Nathan Cross's personal relationship with an employee has caused major clients to question the company's professional standards. Sophie's hand shook as she turned off the TV. This was all her fault. If she had just kept her distance from Nathan, if she hadn't fallen in love with him. Her phone rang. It was Nathan. "Sophie, where are you? I just found out about the leave of absence. Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," she said quietly. "They wouldn't let me see you." "What?" Nathan's voice rose with anger. "Who wouldn't let you see me?" "Your new assistant. She said she had instructions." "I never gave any such instructions," Nathan interrupted. "Sophie, please, come to my place. We need to talk about this in person." Sophie hesitated, thinking about the threatening message. "I don't know if that's a good idea right now." "What's wrong?" Nathan's voice softened with concern. "You're not telling me something." Before Sophie could respond, her phone buzzed with another text. This one had a photo attached, a picture of her leaving her therapist's office during that difficult semester in college. The message read, "Imagine how the board would react if they knew their CEO was dating someone with a history of mental health issues. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Plaza Hotel coffee shop if you want to keep this private." "Sophie, are you still there?" Nathan asked. "I have to go," she said quickly, and hung up, her hands trembling. Meanwhile, across town, Alexander Cross sat in an expensive restaurant with Victor Hale reviewing their progress. "The girl got the messages?" Victor asked, cutting into his steak. "Yes," Alexander smiled. "My private investigator did an excellent job digging up her past. Did you know she had a complete breakdown in college? Had to take medical leave for depression and anxiety. Hardly the stable kind of person who should be involved with a CEO." "Perfect," Victor said. "Once that gets out, combined with the rumors about their relationship starting inappropriately early, Nathan's credibility will be destroyed. The board will have no choice but to remove him. And then," Alexander added, raising his wine glass, "Apex Corporation will finally have the right Cross brother in charge." Back at his penthouse office, Nathan was working late, trying to understand how things had spiraled so out of control. His assistant walked in with a stack of papers. "Sir, these just came from the board. They're requesting a full audit of all promotions and salary increases given to Ms. Bennett since she started at the company." Nathan took the papers, his jaw tight with anger. "Get me everything we have documenting Sophie's work performance. Every evaluation, every project completion, every client commendation, and find out who gave you those instructions about not letting her see me." "That would be Mr. Peterson from marketing, sir. He said it came from the board." Nathan's eyes narrowed. James Peterson had always been close to Alexander. Too close. His phone buzzed with a message from Thomas Chen. "Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. They're moving up the timeline. Whatever you're planning, do it fast. Nathan picked up his phone to call Sophie again, but it went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong, he could feel it. Sophie wasn't the type to avoid confrontation. It was one of the things he loved about her. He grabbed his coat and car keys. Sophie's apartment wasn't far, and he needed to see her face to face. But when he reached her building, her lights were off. The doorman said she had left in a hurry about an hour ago, carrying a small suitcase. Nathan's heart raced as he called her again. This time he left a message. Sophie, whatever's happening, whatever anyone is saying to you, please remember that I love you. We can face anything together. Just talk to me. As he drove home, he didn't notice the car following him or the photographer inside it, taking pictures that would appear in tomorrow's papers under the headline, Trouble in Paradise. Apex CEO makes late-night visit to employee's empty apartment. Sophie, meanwhile, was checking into a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. She needed time to think, to figure out what to do. The threatening messages terrified her, not because she was ashamed of her past, but because she knew how the business world worked. Any hint of instability would be used against Nathan. She sat on the hotel bed and finally let herself cry. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from Nathan, each one making her heart ache more. I need you to know that whatever's happening, we'll face it together. Please just let me know you're safe. I love you, Sophie. Nothing else matters. But something else did matter. Nathan's company, his father's legacy, his reputation, all of it was at risk because of her. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe their love wasn't worth the cost. She pulled out her laptop and began typing, Dear Nathan, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, not forever, just until things calm down. I love you too much to watch your life fall apart because of me. Someone is threatening to expose things from my past, things I should have told you about but was too afraid to share. I'm not ashamed of who I am or what I've been through, but I won't let them use my struggles to destroy you. You need to focus on saving your company right now. Maybe once everything settles down, we can find our way back to each other. But for now, please don't look for me. All my love, Sophie. Her finger hovered over the send button. Was she doing the right thing? Or was she letting the bad guys win? Suddenly there was a knock at her hotel room door. Sophie froze. Nobody knew she was here. She had paid cash specifically to avoid being traced. The knock came again, followed by a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. Open up, Ms. Bennett. I think it's time we had a little chat about your future at Apex Corporation. It was Victor Hale. Sophie looked at her phone, at the unsent email to Nathan. She had a choice to make. Run and hide from her past, or stand and fight for her future. The knock came a third time, more insistent now. I know you're in there, Ms. Bennett, and I have some very interesting documents about your past that I'm sure the board would love to see. Unless, of course, you're willing to make a deal. Sophie stared at the hotel room door, her heart pounding. Victor Hale's voice came through again, smooth and threatening. Your time is running out, Ms. Bennett. Open the door, or tomorrow. Morning, every news outlet in the city gets copies of your medical records. Sophie took a deep breath. She thought about Nathan, about how he had stood up for her in front of everyone. Maybe it was time she stood up for herself. She opened the door. Victor Hale stood there in an expensive suit, holding a thick manila envelope. Behind him was Alexander Cross, Nathan's brother. Sophie's stomach dropped at the sight of him. May we come in? Victor asked with a cold smile. Without waiting for an answer, he pushed past her into the room. Alexander followed, closing the door behind them. How did you find me? Sophie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Money can buy many things, Ms. Bennett, Alexander said, looking around the cheap hotel room with disgust, including information about credit card transactions and phone locations. What do you want? Victor sat down in the room's only chair, placing the envelope on the small table. It's quite simple, really. You're going to resign from Apex Corporation, citing an inappropriate relationship with Nathan. You'll admit that he gave you preferential treatment and that your relationship began while you were still an intern. That's a lie, Sophie protested. The truth doesn't matter, Alexander interrupted. What matters is the story people believe. And with these documents about your mental breakdown in college, who do you think they'll believe? The unstable girl who seduced her boss, or the respected CEO who was taken advantage of? Sophie felt anger rising in her chest. Is that what this is about? You're trying to destroy Nathan's reputation to take over the company? Alexander's face darkened. That company should have been mine. I'm the oldest son. I worked there longer, but dear old Dad always favored Nathan, just like everyone else. Your father chose Nathan because he cared about people, not just profits, Sophie shot back. Something you clearly know nothing about. Victor stood up, his patience wearing thin. Enough chat. Here's what's going to happen. You'll sign this confession I've prepared, leave town and never contact Nathan again. In return, your private medical history stays private. And if I refuse, then not only does your past become public knowledge, but certain financial irregularities will be discovered in Apex's books. Irregularities that seem to lead right to Nathan's office. Victor smiled coldly. How long do you think he'll last as CEO when he's facing both scandal and fraud investigations? Sophie's mind raced. They were trying to trap her, to use her against Nathan. But something wasn't adding up. These financial irregularities, she said slowly. They wouldn't happen to involve the Anderson contract from last year, would they? Alexander's smug expression faltered slightly. What do you know about that? Sophie allowed herself a small smile. Working as Nathan's assistant had taught her a lot about the company's operations, including things that Alexander might not want revealed. I know that someone tried to divert funds from that contract into offshore accounts, and I know that Nathan asked me to quietly gather documentation about it, though he never told me why. She looked directly at Alexander. I always wondered who was behind that attempted fraud. The brothers stared at each other for a long moment before Alexander spoke again, his voice tight with fury. You're bluffing. You don't have proof of anything. Maybe not, Sophie admitted, but I have copies of every document I found stored somewhere safe. I was protecting Nathan's interests. Funny how that worked out, isn't it? Victor stood up abruptly. This changes nothing. Sign the confession or... He was interrupted by a knock at the door. Hotel security! We've had noise complaints from this room. Before anyone could move, the door opened to reveal not hotel security, but Nathan Cross, accompanied by Thomas Chen and 2 actual police officers. Hello, brother, Nathan said coldly to Alexander. Having a nice chat with my girlfriend. Alexander's face went pale. How did you find you? Nathan. Finished. Did you really think Sophie wouldn't have her phone's location sharing turned on after getting threatening messages? Though I have to admit, I didn't expect to find my own brother here plotting against me. Mr. Hale, Mr. Cross, one of the officers stepped forward. We'd like you both to come with us. We have some questions about certain financial transactions and allegations of blackmail. Victor tried to grab the envelope with Sophie's medical records, but Thomas was faster. I'll take that, he said. The board will be very interested in seeing how far you two were willing to go to manipulate the company. As the police led Victor and Alexander away, Sophie fell into Nathan's arms, finally letting out the tears she'd been holding back. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have told you about my past, about the depression. Hey, Nathan lifted her chin gently. You have nothing to apologize for. We all have parts of our past we struggle with. I'm just sorry they tried to use yours against you. But the company, your reputation, are both going to be fine, Nathan assured her. Thomas has been helping me gather evidence of Alexander's embezzlement attempts for months. We just needed to catch him in the act of trying to take over the company to prove it wasn't just a one-time thing. So you knew about him trying to frame you for financial fraud? Nathan nodded. I suspected. That's why I had you gather those documents last year. I just never imagined he'd drag you into it like this. He touched her cheek softly. When you disappeared tonight, I was terrified. Promise me you won't try to protect me by running away again. Sophie managed a small smile. Promise. But what happens now? The board still might not accept our relationship. Actually, Thomas spoke up from where he'd been quietly making phone calls. I think the board will be too busy dealing with the fallout of Alexander's crimes to worry about who you're dating, especially once they realize that Sophie's documentation helped uncover the fraud. See? Nathan pulled Sophie close again. Everything's going to be okay, though I do have one condition. Sophie looked up at him nervously. What's that? No more secrets between us. Deal? Deal, Sophie agreed, reaching up to kiss him. As they left the hotel together, Sophie felt lighter than she had in days. The threats and secrets that had seemed so powerful in the darkness couldn't stand up to the light of truth or the strength of real love. But across town, in the back of a police car, Alexander Cross was already planning his next move. He might be down, but he wasn't out. Not yet. And he had one last card to play, one that would shake Nathan and Sophie's world to its core. The eye. Morning newspapers told a very different story than Alexander had planned. Instead of headlines about Sophie's past or Nathan's supposed misconduct, the front pages blazed with news of corporate corruption. Apex Corporation. Scandal. CEO's brother arrested for embezzlement. Victor Hale and Alexander Cross caught in. Blackmail plot. Whistleblower documentation reveals years of financial fraud. Sophie read the articles from Nathan's penthouse apartment, still wearing his borrowed robe from the night before. After everything that had happened at the hotel, neither of them had wanted to be alone. "You're famous," Nathan said, bringing her a cup of coffee, "though they're calling you an unnamed whistleblower to protect your privacy." "I wasn't trying to be a whistleblower," Sophie said. "I was just doing my job, keeping records like you asked me to." "You did more than that. You stood up to them, used the information to protect the company." He sat beside her on the couch. "The board is meeting this morning to discuss everything." "Want to come with me?" Sophie hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Absolutely. You're the hero of this story, Sophie. It's time everyone knew it." But as they drove to the office, Sophie couldn't shake her unease. Alexander's last look in the hotel room had been one of pure hatred. Men like him and Victor Hale didn't give up easily. The office was buzzing with excitement when they arrived. People who had avoided Sophie days before now smiled and waved. She heard whispers, but they were different now. "Did you hear? She helped catch the people stealing from the company. I can't believe Alexander Cross tried to frame his own brother. No wonder Nathan fell for her. She's brilliant." Margaret from HR met them at Nathan's office, looking flustered. "Mr. Cross, Ms. Bennett, the board is ready for you, but there's something you should know first." Before she could finish, a familiar voice rang out from Nathan's office. "Hello, darling, it's been too long." Sophie felt Nathan stiffen beside her. Standing in the office doorway was an elegant woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in designer clothes. "Mother," Nathan said coldly, "what are you doing here?" Elizabeth Cross stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Is that any way to greet your mother? Especially when I've flown all the way from Paris to help handle this unfortunate situation with your brother." Her eyes fell on Sophie, examining her from head to toe. "And this must be the employee I've been hearing so much about." "This is Sophie," Nathan said firmly, taking Sophie's hand. "My girlfriend." "Yes, well, about that." Elizabeth's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The board has asked me to temporarily step in as chairman while we sort out this mess, and we need to discuss the appropriateness of certain relationships." "The board can't appoint you without my approval," Nathan argued. "Actually, they can. Check your father's will again, darling. In the event of a crisis involving both his sons, I retain the right to step in and protect the company's interests." She held up a legal document. "Your father may have trusted you to run the company, but he trusted me to keep the family legacy intact." Sophie felt the ground shifting beneath her feet again. Just when they thought they'd overcome their obstacles, a new one appeared. "Nathan," Sophie whispered, "maybe I should go." "No," he said firmly. "We face things together now, remember?" Elizabeth watched their exchange with calculating eyes. How sweet. "But dear, surely you understand that a CEO cannot be romantically involved with someone who helped expose corporate fraud. It raises all sorts of questions about loyalty and motivations." "Sophie helped expose Alexander's crimes," Nathan protested. "Did she? Or did she gather information about sensitive financial matters while involved with the CEO, then use it for her own purposes?" Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "Perception matters in business, darling. You taught me that. Don't try to twist this around," Nathan warned. "Sophie saved this company. Perhaps. But at what cost to our family?" Elizabeth turned to Sophie. "My dear, you seem like a lovely girl. Surely you don't want to be the reason this family falls apart. First Alexander's arrest, and now all this drama with Nathan." Sophie felt sick. Elizabeth's words were like poisoned honey, sweet on the surface but deadly underneath. "The family was already falling apart," Nathan said. "Where were you when Alexander was stealing from the company? When he was trying to destroy my reputation? I was protecting our interests, as I always have." Elizabeth sighed dramatically. "Your father built this company from nothing. Everything we have, the homes, the lifestyle, your precious CEO position, it all depends on Apex's success. Are you really willing to risk that for a girl you've known barely a year?" Before Nathan could respond, his assistant rushed in. "Mr. Cross, urgent call from the police. They're releasing Alexander on bail." Elizabeth smiled. "Excellent. Now we can begin dealing with this as a family. Alexander committed crimes. Sophie found her voice. This isn't something you can just sweep under the rug. My dear, Elizabeth's voice dripped with condescension. You have no idea what this family is capable of handling. Nathan, the board is waiting. Shall we? Nathan looked torn between fury and frustration. This isn't over, Mother. Of course. Not, darling, it's only beginning. Elizabeth turned to Sophie. Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Family matters, you understand. As Nathan was led away to the board meeting, Sophie stood alone in his office. Through the glass walls, she could see Elizabeth talking animatedly to the board members gathering in the conference room. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mother dearest isn't the only one with secrets. How much do you really know about Nathan's past? Meet me for coffee if you want to learn the truth about the man you love. A. Sophie stared at the message. Alexander was out on bail and already plotting his next move, but this time, running. Away wasn't an option. Whatever secrets the Cross family was hiding, she would face them head-on. She typed a quick reply. Name the place. The response came immediately. Where it all began. The coffee shop where you first met Nathan. 1 hour. Sophie grabbed her purse, her mind racing. She was walking into a trap, she knew that. But sometimes the only way to escape a trap was to spring it yourself. As she left the office, she didn't. Notice Elizabeth Cross watching her from the conference room, a satisfied smile on her face. The older woman turned to the board members and said, Now let's discuss the real reason I'm here. It's time for some changes at Apex Corporation. The coffee shop was exactly as Sophie remembered it from the day she first met Nathan. She could still picture him standing in line, his tie slightly crooked, checking his phone while waiting for his black coffee. That was before he became CEO, before everything got complicated. Alexander was already there, sitting at a corner table. He looked different from the polished businessman who had threatened her in the hotel room. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said as Sophie sat down across from him. Just tell me what you want, Alexander. He pushed a manila envelope across the table. The truth about your perfect boyfriend, the things Mother and Nathan don't want anyone to know. Sophie didn't touch the envelope. Why should I believe anything you say? Because, unlike my dear brother, I have nothing left to lose. Alexander leaned forward. Did Nathan ever tell you about Rebecca? Sophie felt a chill run down her spine. Who's Rebecca? His first love, the woman he was supposed to marry 5 years ago. Alexander smiled without humor. No, I'm not surprised. Nathan likes to pretend that part of his life never happened. What happened to her? She died. Car accident 2 weeks before the wedding. Nathan was driving. Alexander watched Sophie's face carefully. He walked away without a scratch. She wasn't so lucky. Sophie's hands trembled slightly. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know who you're really in love with. After Rebecca died, Nathan changed. He threw himself into work, became obsessed with control. Dad made him CEO not because he was more qualified, but because he thought it would help Nathan recover. Alexander's eyes hardened. Meanwhile, I was pushed aside, told to support my grieving brother. Everyone forgot that Rebecca was my friend too. Before Sophie could respond, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Victoria. Emergency at the office. Elizabeth Cross just called an all-hands meeting. Where are you? Trouble at the office? Alexander asked, noticing her expression. Mother does love her dramatic announcements. What's she planning? Why don't you open the envelope and find out? Sophie finally reached for the envelope, pulling out a stack of documents. Her eyes widened as she read. They were board resolutions, already signed by several members, approving a complete restructuring of Apex Corporation. Nathan would remain CEO in name only, with all real power transferred to a new executive committee, headed by Elizabeth Cross. She's staging a corporate coup, Sophie realized. Mother always was better at business than either of us, Alexander said. She let Dad think he was in charge, but she was the real power behind Apex. Now she's taking direct control. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to understand something. Nathan isn't the golden boy everyone thinks he is. He's broken, controlled by guilt over Rebecca's death and Mother's manipulation. You're just his latest attempt at redemption. Sophie stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're wrong about him. Am I? Then why didn't he tell you about Rebecca? About Mother's real role in the company? Face it, Sophie. You fell in love with a man who doesn't really exist. Sophie grabbed the documents and turned to leave, but Alexander's next words stopped her. There's something else you should know. The night Rebecca died, Nathan wasn't just driving. He was on his way to tell her the wedding was off. He'd fallen in love with someone else, Rebecca's best friend. Alexander's voice was filled with bitterness. That's the kind of man my brother really is. Sophie hurried out of the coffee shop, her mind spinning. She had to get back to the office, had to warn Nathan about his mother's plans. But Alexander's revelations kept echoing in her head. When she reached Apex Corporation, the lobby was packed with employees heading to the all-hands meeting. Sophie slipped into the crowded conference room just as Elizabeth Cross took the stage. "Thank you all for coming," Elizabeth began, every inch the gracious corporate leader. "As you know, recent events have raised serious concerns about Apex's leadership structure. The board has decided it's time for changes." Sophie searched the room for Nathan, but couldn't find him. Where was he? "Effective immediately," Elizabeth continued. "Apex Corporation will be restructured to ensure better oversight and control. While Nathan will continue as CEO, he'll be working closely with a new executive committee to guide the company's future." The room buzzed with whispers. Sophie felt her phone vibrate. A text from Nathan. "Don't trust anything she says. Meet me in my father's old office. Hurry." Sophie slipped out of the meeting and took the elevator to the top floor. Robert Cross's old office had been untouched since his death, preserved like a museum to Apex's founder. Nathan was there, standing by his father's desk, holding what looked like an old letter. "I should have told you about Rebecca," he said without turning around. "Nathan, Alexander told you, didn't he? About the accident, about why it happened." He finally faced her, his eyes filled with pain. "But he didn't tell you everything." "What do you mean?" "Rebecca's death wasn't an accident, at least not entirely." Nathan's voice shook slightly. "She found out about the affair. Not mine, but Alexander's. He was the one sleeping with her. Best friend. When she confronted him, threatened to expose him, he tampered with her car's brakes." Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" "I figured it out months later. Found proof in Alexander's things. But by then, Mother had convinced everyone I was unstable with grief. She said pursuing it would destroy the family." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "So I stayed quiet, took the CEO position and waited for a chance to make things right. And now? Now I have proof, not just of Alexander's current crimes, but of what he did to Rebecca. Mother knows I found it. That's why she's here, trying to take control before I can expose everything." Suddenly the office door opened. Elizabeth Cross stood there, looking unsurprised to find them together. "I always knew you'd try to ruin this family, Nathan," she said coldly. "Just like your father, always choosing truth over loyalty." "It's over, Mother," Nathan said. "I'm done keeping Alexander's secrets. Done letting you control this company through manipulation and lies." Elizabeth's perfect composure cracked slightly. "You ungrateful boy. Everything I've done was to protect this family." "No," Sophie stepped forward. "Everything you've done was to protect your power. But it's finished now." "Is it?" Elizabeth smiled dangerously. "Alexander told me about your little coffee shop meeting. How does it feel, Sophie, knowing Nathan kept such huge secrets from you? Can you ever really trust him now?" Sophie looked at Nathan, saw the fear and hope warring in his eyes. In that moment, she made her choice. "Yes," she said firmly, "because unlike you, he's trying to make things right." Before Elizabeth could respond, voices came from the hallway. Thomas Chen with several police officers. "Mrs. Cross," one officer stepped forward, "we need you to come with us. We have some questions about your involvement in covering up a 5-year-old vehicular homicide." As the officers led Elizabeth away, her perfect facade finally crumbled. "Everything I did for this family," she shouted. "Nathan, don't do this. Don't destroy everything we built." But Nathan wasn't listening. He was looking at Sophie, his eyes full of questions he was afraid to ask. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you about Rebecca," he said softly. "I wanted to, but I was afraid I'd see you differently." He nodded. Sophie took his hand. "We all have pasts, Nathan. What matters is who we choose to be now." Outside the office, they could hear the chaos as news of Elizabeth and Alexander's arrests spread through the building. But in that moment, standing in the room where so many secrets had been kept, Nathan and Sophie finally found their truth. The old letter in Nathan's hand fluttered to the desk, a confession from Alexander about Rebecca, written in a moment of drunk guilt years ago. The last piece of evidence needed to bring justice not just to Apex Corporation, but to a young woman who had died trying to expose the truth. "What happens now?" Sophie asked. "Now," Nathan said, pulling her close. We start over. No more secrets, no more lies. Just us, facing whatever comes next together. But even as they held each other, neither noticed the final text message lighting. Up Sophie's phone. You think this is over? Mother and I aren't done yet. Some secrets are worth killing for. A. The next few days at Apex Corporation were chaos. News of Elizabeth and Alexander's arrests dominated the business headlines. Reporters camped outside the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of Nathan or anyone else involved in the scandal. Sophie sat in her restored office, going through old files. After Elizabeth's failed takeover attempt, the board had not only reinstated Sophie but promoted her to Director of Operations. It should have been a happy time, but Alexander's threatening message kept playing in her mind. Some secrets are worth killing for. A knock on her door made her jump. It was Thomas Chen, looking worried. Sophie, we have a problem. Elizabeth and Alexander are out on bail again. Their lawyers argued they're not a flight risk because of their connections to the company. Sophie's stomach churned. Does Nathan know? He's in an emergency board meeting right now. But there's something else. Thomas closed the door. The police found evidence that Rebecca's death wasn't their only crime. There have been other accidents over the years. People who got too close to the truth about Apex's secret dealings. What kind of secret dealings? Money laundering mostly. Using Apex's international offices to clean money for some very dangerous people. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. Elizabeth didn't just run the company from the shadows. She turned it into a front for criminal operations. Nathan's father suspected something near the end, which is why he changed his will to put Nathan in charge. Sophie's phone buzzed with another text. Mother says hello. Family dinner tonight. Don't worry, we'll bring the food. Hope you're not allergic to anything deadly. They're not going to stop, are they? Sophie showed Thomas the message. No, they're not. Elizabeth has too much to lose. If the truth about her criminal empire comes out, she's facing life in prison. Suddenly, Nathan burst into the office. Sophie, we need to go now. What's wrong? Security just caught someone tampering with your car. The brake lines were cut. Nathan's face was pale with fury. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Sophie grabbed her purse with shaking hands. As they headed for the elevator, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo, a picture of her parents' house with Alexander standing in front of it. Family is so important. Don't you think? Be at the Golden Dragon restaurant at 8 p.m. or your parents might have an unfortunate accident. Come alone. Nathan, Sophie showed him the photo. What do we do? We end this. Tonight. Nathan turned to Thomas. Call Detective Rogers. Tell her it's time to move on everything we discussed. Then get Sophie's parents somewhere safe. What are you planning? Sophie asked as they rode down to the parking garage. Alexander and Mother think they're the only ones who can play dirty. But I've spent years gathering evidence, building a case against their entire operation. Nathan took her hand. After Rebecca died, I swore I'd bring them down. I just never thought they'd target someone I love again. In the parking garage, they found James Peterson from marketing examining Sophie's car. What are you doing here? Nathan demanded. James straightened up, looking nervous. I was just checking to make sure the brake lines were properly cut. Nathan grabbed him by the collar. How long have you been working for them? Please, James whimpered. They have dirt on me too. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, Sophie said, and you made the wrong one. Security officers appeared, leading James away. Nathan turned to Sophie. I know what you're thinking, but you can't meet them tonight. It's too dangerous. They'll hurt my parents. Your parents are already safe. Thomas has a security team. Moving them to a protected location. Nathan cupped her face in his hands. But I need you safe too, please. Sophie looked into his eyes and saw real fear there. What aren't you telling me? The Golden Dragon restaurant, that's where Rebecca died. They're not just threatening you, they're recreating her murder. A chill ran down Sophie's spine. Then let's recreate it. But this time we'll be ready for them. Sophie, no, listen to me. Your mother and brother think they're untouchable because they've always held all the cards, but now we have something they don't. What's that? Each other. And the truth. Sophie squared her shoulders. You've spent years building a case against them. Let me help you finish it. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Okay, but we do this my way. With backup. They spent the next few hours putting their plan together. Detective. Rogers arranged for undercover officers to be stationed throughout the restaurant. Thomas coordinated with federal agents, who had been building their own case against Elizabeth's money laundering operation. At 7:45 p.m., Sophie walked into the Golden Dragon restaurant alone. She was wearing a wire with Nathan and the police monitoring everything from a van outside. Elizabeth and Alexander were already there, sitting at a corner table. Elizabeth looked as elegant as ever, while Alexander seemed twitchy and nervous. "Sophie, dear," Elizabeth smiled coldly. "So glad you could join us. Please sit. I took the liberty of ordering for everyone." Sophie sat down, her heart pounding. "Where are my parents?" "Safe, for now," Alexander said, "as long as you cooperate." A waiter brought drinks, white wine for everyone. Sophie noticed Alexander's hands shaking as he reached for his glass. "You know," Elizabeth said conversationally, "I always wondered what Nathan saw in you. But now I understand. You remind me of myself at your age, ambitious, clever, willing to do whatever it takes to get ahead." "I'm nothing like you," Sophie replied. "No? Then why are you really here? To protect your parents? Or because you want to?" "Know all our secrets." Elizabeth's eyes glittered. "You want to understand the power we hold, don't you? The things we could teach you?" Before Sophie could respond, Alexander suddenly grabbed his throat, gasping for air. His face was turning red. "Mother," he choked out. What did you—" Elizabeth watched calmly as her son slumped forward onto the table. "I'm sorry, dear, but you've become a liability. Too unstable, too likely to talk." She turned back to Sophie. "Now shall we discuss your future with Apex Corporation?" Sophie stared in horror at Alexander's still form. "You poisoned your own son?" "I've sacrificed everything for this company," Elizabeth said. "One more sacrifice won't matter." She raised her wine glass. "Drink up, dear. Your glass has something special in it too. Can't leave any loose ends, you understand?" But Sophie smiled. "Actually, I do understand about leaving no loose ends." Right on cue, police officers burst into the restaurant. Detective Rogers walked up to the table, gesturing to Sophie's wine glass. "That should be all the evidence we need. Attempted murder, caught on camera, and microphone." Elizabeth's composure finally shattered. "You little bitch. You're just like Rebecca, thinking you could expose us." "No," Nathan's voice came from behind her. "She's smarter than that. She let you expose yourself." Paramedics rushed to help Alexander, who was already responding to the antidote they'd prepared, knowing Elizabeth would try to tie up loose ends. As the police led Elizabeth away in handcuffs, she turned to Nathan one last time. "I was protecting our legacy." "No, Mother, you destroyed it. Now Sophie and I will build something new, something honest." Later that night, after hours of police statements and media chaos, Sophie and Nathan stood in his office overlooking the city. "It's really over," Sophie said wonderingly. "Almost." Nathan pulled out a small box. "There's one more thing I need to ask you." But before he could open it, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an overseas number. "Strange," he said. "All our international offices should be closed now." He answered the call, and his face went white as he listened. "What is it?" Sophie asked when he hung up. "That was our Hong Kong office. Someone transferred all of Apex's international assets an hour ago. Everything, over $2 billion, gone. But how? Elizabeth and Alexander are in custody. Because there's one more cross we forgot about," Nathan said grimly. "My sister Isabella. She's been running the Asian operations for years, and now she has all the money and all of Mother's connections," Sophie realized. Nathan's phone buzzed with a text. "Dear brother, Mother says you'll need a good lawyer. Don't worry. I'll make sure the family fortune is well taken care of. Give Sophie my love. Isabella." The war for Apex Corporation wasn't over. It was just moving to a new battlefield. The Hong Kong skyline glittered outside Isabella Cross's penthouse office. At 35, she was the only Cross sibling who had inherited their mother's perfect poise and calculating mind. She smiled as she read the morning headlines about her mother and brother's arrests. "Everything going according to plan, Miss Cross?" asked Lin Chen, Thomas Chen's cousin and Isabella's right-hand woman. "Perfect timing, as Mother would say." Isabella turned from the window. "How are our friends at Apex handling the missing billions?" "The company is in chaos. Nathan Cross has called an emergency board meeting, but without access to the international accounts. He's helpless." Isabella picked up a framed family photo from her desk, taken years ago, before Rebecca's death, before everything fell apart. Poor Nathan, always trying to be the good son. He never understood that in our family being good is a weakness. Meanwhile, back in New York, Sophie sat in Nathan's office. watching him pace as he talked to the company's lawyers. There has to be a way to reverse the transfers, he was saying. She can't just steal $2 billion. But legally, Isabella hadn't stolen anything. As head of Apex's Asian operations, she had authorization to move funds between international accounts. By the time anyone noticed what she'd done, the money had been scattered through a maze of offshore holdings. "Nathan," Sophie said gently after he hung up, "tell me about Isabella. You've never mentioned her before." Nathan sank into his chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "Because I thought she was the only one of us who got out clean. She left for Hong Kong right after college, said she wanted nothing to do with the family drama." He laughed bitterly. "Now I realize she was just playing a longer game." "Mr. Cross," his assistant interrupted through the intercom, "there's a Ms. Lin Chen here to see you. She says she's Thomas's cousin." Nathan and Sophie exchanged worried looks. A moment later, an elegant Chinese woman in her 30s entered the office. "Nathan Cross," Lin smiled. "Isabella sends her regards. What does my sister want?" "To make a deal." Lin placed a folder on his desk. "Isabella is willing to return the money, with conditions. First, all charges against your mother and Alexander must be dropped." "That's not going to happen," Sophie said firmly. "Second," Lin continued as if Sophie hadn't spoken, "Isabella becomes CEO of Apex Corporation. You'll remain as a figurehead, Nathan, but all real power transfers to her. And if I refuse, then Apex Corporation goes bankrupt. Your employees lose their jobs. Your father's legacy crumbles." Lin's smile widened. "Oh, and Isabella releases documents showing that you knew about Mother's money laundering operation all along. You'll go to prison alongside her." "Those documents would be fake," Sophie protested. "Does it matter? The scandal alone would destroy him." Lin checked her watch. "You have 24 hours to decide. I'll be at the Peninsula Hotel when you're ready to sign the papers." After she left, Sophie turned to Nathan. "She's lying about the documents, right? You didn't know about the money laundering?" Nathan wouldn't meet her eyes. "Nathan, I found out 6 months ago," he admitted quietly. "I've been working with the FBI, helping them track the money flows. That's why I had you gathering those documents about Alexander's transactions. They were connected to Mother's larger operation. Why didn't you tell me?" "To protect you. The less you knew, the safer you were." He finally looked at her. "I never imagined Isabella was involved. I thought I was finally bringing Mother's crimes to justice, but I was just playing into my sister's hands." Sophie's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Need to meet, urgent, come alone to the parking garage." "I have to go," she said, showing Nathan the message. Maybe Thomas has found something that can help. But when Sophie reached the parking garage, it wasn't Thomas waiting for her. It was Isabella Cross herself, looking exactly like her photo, but with colder eyes. "Hello, Sophie. Sorry for the deception, but I needed to meet the woman who helped bring down Mother's empire." Sophie turned to leave, but 2 large men blocked her path. "Please," Isabella said, "I just want to talk." "About Rebecca." That stopped Sophie. "What about Rebecca? Did Nathan tell you why she really died? Not the story about Alexander's affair, but the truth." Isabella stepped closer. "Rebecca found Mother's records, not just the money laundering, but proof that our father's death wasn't natural. Mother poisoned him when he threatened to expose her crimes." Sophie felt the blood drain from her face. "No. Yes. Mother killed our father, and Rebecca was going to expose it, so Mother arranged her accident. Alexander helped cover it up. And Nathan." Isabella smiled sadly. "Nathan chose to stay quiet, to take the CEO position instead of seeking justice, just like he'll choose to take my deal now, to save himself and the company." "You're wrong about him," Sophie said, but doubt crept into her voice. "Am I? Ask him. Ask him if he knew how our father really died." Isabella handed Sophie a USB drive. "All the proof is here. The question is, what will you do with it?" Sophie clutched the drive, her mind spinning. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind me of Rebecca. Smart, idealistic, in love with my brother." Isabella's eyes hardened. She thought she could save him too. It got her killed. "Is that a threat?" "A warning. Take the evidence, Sophie. Give it to the police. But do it quietly and do it alone. If Nathan knows you have it, he'll try to stop you. He'll choose the company over justice, just like he did before." As Isabella turned to leave, she paused. "Oh, and Sophie, you have the same 24 hours as Nathan to make your choice. Save my brother's soul or save his company. You can't do both." Back in Nathan's office, Sophie found him staring at the family photo on his desk. She wanted to ask him about his father's death, about Rebecca, about all the secrets still between them, but looking at his troubled face, she couldn't form the words. "We'll find a way." "To stop Isabella," she said instead. Nathan pulled her into his arms. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "Whatever happens with the company, I can't lose you too." Sophie held him tight, the USB drive heavy in her pocket. She had a choice to make: trust the man she loved or trust the evidence of his past sins. And somewhere in Hong Kong, Isabella. Cross waited to see which path she would choose. The clock was ticking, and more than money hung in the balance. The truth about the Cross family's darkest secrets was finally coming to light, and Sophie stood at the center of the storm. Would she be their salvation or their destruction? Sophie sat in her apartment late that night, the USB drive connected to her laptop. The files confirmed everything Isabella had said. Years of financial records, secret recordings, and finally, the truth about Robert Cross's death, carefully documented by Rebecca before her own murder. Her phone lit up with Nathan's name for the 10th time that evening. She still hadn't told him about meeting Isabella or the evidence she now held. Dawn was approaching, and they both had decisions to make. The sound of someone picking her lock made Sophie freeze. She quickly sent the files to her email, then erased the drive. Her door opened to reveal Lin Chen with 2 men. "Isabella was right about you," Lin said. "Too smart to trust anyone, even Nathan. Where's the drive?" "Gone. I already sent everything." "To the police." It wasn't entirely true. She'd sent it to herself, not the police, but they didn't need to know that. "That's unfortunate." Lin nodded to her men. "Bring her. Isabella wants to handle this personally." But before they could reach Sophie, her apartment door burst open again. Nathan rushed in, followed by Thomas Chen and several police officers. "Step away from her," Nathan ordered, his voice cold with fury. Lin's men reached for weapons but stopped when they saw the police guns trained on them. "Detective Rogers has some interesting questions for you, cousin," Thomas said to Lin. "About your role in Rebecca's death, among other things." As the police led Lin and her men away, Sophie turned to Nathan. "How did you know?" "Because I know you," he said. "I knew you'd look at those files tonight, trying to find the truth, and I knew Isabella would try to stop you." He touched her cheek gently. "I also knew you'd be brave enough to face it alone even though you didn't have to." "Nathan," Sophie took a deep breath, "the files show your father was murdered, that your mother—" "I know." His voice was heavy with old pain. "I've known since Rebecca showed me the proof. That's why I've been working with the FBI all this time, building a case against not just Mother's money laundering, but everything, including Father's murder." "But Isabella said you chose the company over justice." "Isabella never knew the whole truth. After Rebecca died, I made a choice, not to stay quiet, but to work from the inside, to gather evidence, to make sure that when we finally brought them down, it would stick." He ran a hand through his hair. "I couldn't save Rebecca, but I could finish what she started." Sophie's phone buzzed. It was an email from Isabella. "Congratulations, you passed the test. Meet me at Father's grave in 1 hour. Bring Nathan. Time for the truth to come out." An hour later, they stood in the cemetery where Robert Cross was buried. Isabella was already there, looking not like the powerful businesswoman from Hong Kong, but like a tired woman carrying too many secrets. "I knew you'd be smart enough to copy the files before anyone could stop you," she said to Sophie. "Just like I knew you'd be brave enough to face the truth. That's why I chose you." "Chose me for what?" Sophie asked. "To be the catalyst, the one person who could make all of this finally end." Isabella turned to Nathan. "I never helped Mother with her crimes. I went to Hong Kong to find proof of what she did to Father. Rebecca was helping me." "What?" Nathan stared at his sister. "Those billions I took from Apex? They're all traced now. Every dirty dollar Mother laundered, every criminal connection. The FBI has everything." Isabella smiled sadly. "I didn't steal the money, little brother. I exposed it, just like Rebecca wanted to do." Understanding dawned on Sophie's face. "You were working against your mother all along, for years. But I needed someone Mother didn't suspect, someone she'd underestimate. When I saw how you stood up to her, Sophie, how you fought for the truth, I knew you were the key." Isabella reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "This is my confession detailing everything. Mother's crimes, Father's murder, my role in tracking it all. Give it to the police." "Why didn't you tell me?" Nathan asked. "We could have worked together. Because your reactions had to be real. Mother had to believe you were desperate to save the company, or she would have suspected something." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry for letting you think you were alone all these years, but we can make it right now, together." Dawn was breaking over the cemetery as Isabella finished her story. The truth was finally out, all of it. Elizabeth Cross and Alexander would face justice not just for their recent crimes, but for everything. Robert Cross would have his justice at last. "What happens to Apex now?" Sophie asked. "The company will survive," Isabella said. "The legitimate parts of the business are still strong, and with the three of us working together." She looked at Nathan hopefully. "Three of us? If you'll have me as a partner instead of an enemy. You handle the New York operations, I'll keep running Asia, and Sophie." Isabella smiled at her. "Well, I think Father would have loved having you as a daughter-in-law." Nathan took Sophie's hand. "About that, he knelt down right there beside his father's grave. I've been carrying this ring for weeks, waiting for the right moment. After everything we've been through, I realize there's never going to be a perfect moment. There's just us, choosing each other despite everything." Sophie felt tears in her eyes as he pulled out the ring. "Sophie Bennett, you fought for the truth, for justice, for love. You helped heal my family's wounds and taught me that real strength comes from facing the past, not hiding from it. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sophie whispered. "1,000 times, yes." As Nathan slipped the ring on her finger, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light over them. Isabella wiped away tears of her own. "Father would be proud," she said softly. "Of all of us." 1 year later, Apex Corporation's headquarters sparkled in the summer sun. The company had not only survived the scandal, but emerged stronger, with a reputation for transparency and ethical business practices. Sophie stood in her office, now the executive vice president's office, looking out at the city. Her wedding ring caught the light, matching the smile on her face as she read the morning's headlines. Elizabeth Cross sentenced. Justice served in decades-long criminal enterprise. Apex Corporation leads industry in corporate reform. Cross. Siblings rebuild father's legacy. Nathan appeared in her doorway. "Ready for the board meeting, Mrs. Cross?" "Always, Mr. Cross." She gathered her papers, pausing to straighten his tie, the same one she'd fixed on her first day as his assistant, in what felt like another lifetime. As they walked to the conference room together, they passed the wall of photos in the lobby. Robert Cross's portrait hung there, along with a new addition, a family photo taken at Sophie and Nathan's wedding, showing the 3 Cross siblings united at last. Below it was a simple plaque that read, "Truth, Justice, Family, the real legacy of Apex Corporation." Sophie squeezed Nathan's hand as they entered the conference room, where Isabella was already waiting. They had faced lies, betrayal, and death to find their way here. But in the end, love had won. Not just romantic love, but love of family, love of truth, love of justice. The past was healed, the future was bright, and their story was just beginning. "Shall we begin?" Nathan asked, taking his seat at the head of the table. Sophie smiled at her husband, her partner, her love. "Yes," she said. "Let's begin." The end